Welcome to today's episode of Rainer on Leadership. We've got a special episode for you today. I'm feeling special, which means I'm not feeling all that well. But none of you care about that. But it's special because we have Jacki King on the show today. Welcome, Jacki.
Oh, that's so kind. And I care. I'm sad that you're not feeling well today, but really grateful to have the conversation.
Our listeners are here for good content. They want to hear from you. They don't want to hear about my feelings. Nobody cares about my feelings. Nobody needs to care about my feelings. But definitely want to thank Jacki King for being on the show. Jacki's got a new book out. It is called The Calling of Eve. We'll tell you more about that here in a moment, but it's in the show notes as well if you want to go check it out. So we'll be talking, specifically about what happens in the church when women thrive in ministry. Jacki, you are a woman, right?
Yep.
Okay, so good. I'm glad we got that out of the way.
True.
It would be weird for me as a man to talk about this, so it's good to have you on the show to kind of clue us in. But before we do, want to thank our sponsor, Tyndale. They have a really good new study Bible. It's called the Courage for Life Study Bible. You can check it out in the show notes, or you can go to courageforlifebible.com. And, the Bible can be overwhelming. It's big, and it's 66 books. How do you study it? And if you've never studied it before, well, that's an issue. Courage for Life Study Bible really solves that problem. There are 1,464 Bible studies in these Bibles. There is a Courage for Life Study Bible for men and a Courage for Life Study Bible for women. So you want to go check both of those out. If you are a pastor, it is a great resource so that you can be recommending it to your people. And it's just a good one to have in, among your Bibles. It's good to have a good study Bible, and this one uses the New Living Translation, which I really love. So Courage for Life Study Bible is the one that you need to get. If you're looking for a Christmas gift, this is the one. You can check the link in the show notes, and thank you, Tyndale, for sponsoring the show. All right, Jacki, let's dig in. Women account for 6 out of 10 churchgoers, so roughly 60%. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say if women aren't thriving in the church, then the church is not thriving. So this is a key issue. What happens in a church when women thrive? Paint me a picture.
Well, I think, it's always fun, I think, coming to conversations like this and talking about gender, because really, I think the answer, at least to this question, is the same for our brothers, right? The same for men. When men are thriving, when women are thriving, what does that look like? Well, homes are healthier. I think workplaces are being, you're able to share the gospel. I think you're able to be the hands and feet of Jesus. I think whenever you've got men and women learning and being formed and spiritually developed and equipped, they're able to use their gifts. And so where I think maybe the question would kind of veer more toward with women, it's like, well, what specifically around their gifts or around their development, what does that look like with thriving? And so I think that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation and that we're able to talk about this, because it does have some distinctions to it, just like there are distinct genders and there are distinct ways that women are able to kind of bear God's image, and then men in different ways. And so I think when I think about churches that are healthy, you've got men and women thriving together, working alongside one another for the mission of God. And so there's a lot to unpack there, which I know we're about to do as we kind of keep talking. But I love this topic. So really, really excited to dig more in.
By the way, you can dig more into this subject on Jacki's podcast. She has her own podcast, At the Table, which is you do a lot of interviews. You have, in this second season that you're doing, you have some amazing interviews. So I don't want to spoil too much there, but go check out her podcast as well. We'll put a link in the show notes to that. So let's just talk about this. So women thriving, what does that word mean to you, thrive? So like if you feel like you are thriving in your church, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think even that word thriving, it immediately makes me think of the Sermon on the Mount. And so this idea of flourishing, and that we are ultimately trying to take all image bearers, we're trying to take disciples of Jesus to make them more like Christ, and to make them not only in word, but also in deed. And so I think we're trying to formulate not only this spiritual formation and this process, we've got intentional ways that we're able to equip women within our churches, but then we're also leveraging it. So the thriving part is not just a consume or learn or become a lot smarter theologically, or even just with how things work, but then actually putting that to practice. And so you've got orthodoxy and orthopraxy. And so I think a lot of times, as we're going to kind of talk about, when you're looking at women's ministries, they can often be siloed to where it's just a group of women and they're getting really smart about the things of God, but then they're never actually living that out, or they're never actually like taking what they're learning and they're filling the blanks and practicing that in the day to day. Or you've got maybe not a lot of depth. You've got not a lot of getting deep into the word, into doctrine and theological matters, but they're just busy. Maybe they're socializing or they're doing a lot of mission projects, but they're not ever combining those two. And so I think the heart of the believer is really trying to make sure that the things that we're learning about God, the ways that we are trying to form our lives around the person of Jesus, that's going to change not only us internally, but then externally in who we are, what we do. And then that changes how we are as moms, how we are as wives, as coworkers, as neighbors. And so all of it really does connect together. And unless you've got some intentionality combining all of those things together, you're going to be lacking in one way or the other.
So let's talk about your book for a moment, because it's got a unique subject matter that, and by the way, not just for women. Obviously, you're giving a woman's perspective, but men should be reading your book too. It's great for pastors to be digging in, because I just think you offer a perspective that really hasn't been offered much. So, you've got this title, The Calling of Eve, and really what it leads into is the subject matter of the book, which is, how God accomplishes his goal through the contributions of women in Scripture. Now, I will admit this, as a man, most pastors are male, and I get that that's a big debate, and that's not really the purpose of this show, is to debate that. So, Jackie, you're not allowed to debate me on that. Even though I know we agree on this subject matter, believe it or not. Before our listeners go, oh no, it's about to get interesting. No, we couldn't really debate, because we kind of agree on this. But my point is, more pastors tend to be male, and you can't help but think about things through a male perspective because you're male, which means that you're often missing the women of the Bible. And there's a lot to learn from them. And I know I've been guilty of teaching and preaching the Bible and not necessarily glossing over the contributions of women. I don't feel like I do that, but I just lean more into the male-centric stories because I'm a man. And that's not a sinful thing. It's just a perspective I have. So I have to work to get out of that. And I have to ask myself the question, okay, this is not this is not my default setting. So how am I going to teach a woman's contribution? Which is what your book is about. So dig into help me as a pastor dig into this a little bit. How do the women of the Bible inspire women in churches today? And what can a pastor like me do about that?
Yeah. I love what you said there, because I think a lot of pastors are maybe kind of feeling that tension, especially because of the heightened conversation around the role of women in churches, no matter what denomination you're in. And I think as a sister, as somebody that even has the privilege of getting to work alongside you, it means a lot that you would say, hey, this is kind of my frame of reference, and I need to be able to broaden out in different ways. And how can you help me do that? And I think that's honestly the question that we need to be asking, because even before writing the book, and I grew up in the church. I love the church, but so much of the conversation was started with what women are not allowed to do. And so, of course, that's going to be very defining, not only in how I use my gifts, but also even deeper than that, my identity and my attachment to what I view God as, like who I view him as. And then how do I attach to his mission if I'm not allowed to do XYZ? So it's trying to not get in trouble, especially with my personality, right? Like I'm trying to make sure that I'm staying in step with God instead of the conversation of, this is how God has made both man and woman, both in distinction, but even more in sameness. And then how he's able to gift us, how he's able to empower us and use women. So honestly, going into writing the book, it was really uncomfortable. And I've been, going around teaching at conferences and retreats and, just for years, decades. And oftentimes I would not teach on women of the Bible because it just seemed so cliche. It seemed so like, oh, it's a women's event, so let's talk about Ruth, or it's a women's event, let's do for such a time as this. So it was really good for me to have to spend time in the Word, digging through these stories of women. And really the book is tracing women through redemptive history. And so you've got to be able to take like the creation story and Eve and how she is the mother of the living and how God promised in Genesis 3:15 that he is going to redeem everything that was just broken in the fall. And through her, that sets out a beautiful story of God's redemptive plan and purposes through broken people like you and me, but really purposefully kind of choosing women throughout the Bible and then how they were able to be image bearers and how they were able to be plans of redemption as moms, as wives in marriage, as women in the church, as missions and church planters. I mean, like women are all over that thing. And so the irony is that you're right. In our churches, there's not a lot of emphasis on women, and yet they're all over the Bible and they're all over the pews or the seats in our churches. And we're not able to connect what God has made them for because we're busy either forgetting them altogether or we're trying to kind of play a nuance or answer the question, what are they not allowed to do? Or what are they not like? I don't want to overstep instead of, hey, this is how God's made you. This is how God has been using women all throughout redemptive history, and you get to be a part of that. And so it's a very different conversation and freeing, I think, for so many of us to say, you're right, like God has made me this way and he has gifted me in this way. And so let's follow his mission together.
So I have 4 children, sometimes more, because we in and out with fostering. I just never know.
Right, right.
I make the joke, my wife brings home children like she brings home groceries. I just never know. And one of the things that has opened my eyes to this particular subject is having daughters.
Mm.
I have my 2 oldest are girls, and I think about women's sports differently now because I have 2 daughters. I grew up in an all male household. Like I had my mom, but it was me and my brothers. So I didn't even have sisters. So, this womanhood was an enigma to me because I just wasn't around it a whole lot. And this idea of boundaries and nuance. You mentioned those 2 things. So defining this issue of women's roles in ministry, defining this issue by what you can't do, and then defining this issue by all the nuance. We miss 99% of everything else. And of course, that's what people gravitate towards because that's where the controversy is. Mm-hmm. And frankly, that's where it can be fun because, if you get on the Twitter debates and you read into this stuff, it's like, watching all the people go back and forth and taking shots at each other. And, okay, it's entertaining. Or perhaps it's burdening to you. I don't know. But it gets your attention. So we need to there's nothing wrong with talking about the nuance. There's nothing wrong with talking about the boundaries. They're there for a reason.
Sure.
But we're missing the greater picture when that's all we discuss. And I think that people like you are really helping the church realize that there is a lot more about this topic. There is a lot more about the subject matter. There's a lot more in the Bible than just the nuance and just the boundaries. Mm-hmm. There's a whole slew of commands and, concepts that women should be doing, and we often miss it. So I'm glad that we have people like you that are speaking into this subject matter. So Guys, those of you who are guys, go get this book and go. Women too, of course. Your market, it's 6 out of 10 are church members are women, so your market is bigger with the women if you're going to sell the book. But the guys need to be reading it as well. All right, let me ask you a question. We're both millennials.
Mm-hmm.
You're younger than me, right? You're younger than me. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we're both millennials. What is different in the church today compared with previous generations?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I have the privilege of serving in a church that is multi-generational. I know that's not necessarily the case for all churches, but there are some big shifts happening. And even so much in my lifetime, just within the last decade or so, to where when I started women's ministry and girls ministry, it was really common to have stay-at-home moms. And so I could have a Bible study on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock with childcare and have it packed full of retired women that weren't working anymore and brand new mamas. To where now there's a shift to where we've got a lot more working moms. We've got moms that are juggling a lot more on their plate. And I forget what the statistic is, but even stay-at-home moms are even doing like some kind of like hybrid work, to where they're creating something in their home, or they're doing some kind of remote work part-time, or if they're not doing something for a vocation, they're serving PTA, those kind of things. So we've got a lot more busyness, a lot more just kind of fluidness that I think is happening with women on the different, I don't necessarily want to say roles, but the different like jobs, occupations, the way that they're spending their time. So I think that's a huge shift for ministry to women. I think another big shift that is happening, and you mentioned women's sports, this whole conversation around gender identity and men and women is something that is coming at the church in full force right now. And so I think a lot of what is happening is because the church hasn't done a great job of really teaching a biblical Genesis 1 and 2, like celebrating both genders. It's only been in those constructs of what you can't do or how the other is holding the other back. So because we haven't had really good theological discussions and conversations, exactly like you said, we are seeing just really this undoing or this question to identity. And we're seeing that in our younger generations as well. So I have the privilege of serving in our college ministry. And a lot of the conversations that we're having are around purpose and roles and, just that shift of my mom stayed at home with me, but I want to have a career. Or I've got women that are trying to figure out, what does God say about sexuality? What does God say about me being born a woman? And what does that mean, not only in the identity piece, but then how that fleshes out toward God's kingdom. So I think there's so much happening on top of just the busyness of life, and trying to be able to find ways to meet them in their homes, meet them in their workplaces, on their school campuses, and kind of do some of that deep theological equipping, but then also just the practical, hey, this is life and it's hard.
Yeah, I know here in Florida, we have a lot more working women than
Mm-hmm.
what I remember growing up. And I could have looked up, I'm sure I could Google the stats, but I have a feeling that yes, there are a lot more women in the workforce today than
Mm-hmm.
in the past. And also, women now make up more of undergraduate programs than men.
Mm-hmm.
So we are seeing a massive shift culturally. Now, you could comment however you want to about that, whether it's good or bad. Frankly, I think it's good that women would pursue their goals and get an education and do what God has called them to do. But let me kind of press in a little bit, and as it pertains not just to the culture but to the church.
Mm-hmm.
We have men's groups and women's groups here. We have co-ed groups. We have traditional Sunday school. We have Bible studies. We have home groups and on-site groups. We have women teachers. We have male teachers. Our group system is all over the place. And we have men and women serving in various capacities in our church. Women serve on our council. Women serve on our committees. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Does ministry need to be segregated, or can it be integrated into the church?
Can I say both? I think we need
No,
to
that's a
see.
classic Rainer answer.
It is.
It
I learned
depends. It
that from
depends.
y'all. It depends. It depends. So again, I think going back, ministry to women was such a segregated, like it was its own arm. Like they had their own budget, they had their own council and leadership team, and how they get to spend their money how they want. Like that's not a healthy way to look at discipling and equipping your women. It needs to be integrated into the bigger model of whatever that discipleship process is to the church. And so, which is ultimately going to be led by the pastor, the elders, whatever. So if there is no integration, if there is no brothers and sisters walking alongside one another in groups, whether they're serving alongside one another, then we're missing that brother-sister familial relationship that needs to happen. We cannot honor one another if we're never in the same room. We cannot learn from one another if we're never understanding your different perspective as a male, as a brother, and my different perspective of the same situation. And I think when we're able to come together with that difference, we're stronger in how we're able to look at and see, what is God doing? Like, how do we problem solve through this? So do they need to be serving on your councils and committees? Do they need to be leading and teaching in different ways? Absolutely. But there is something that is very different. And I think you would say this, the way that guys bond over a sports game is very different than how women would bond over a charcuterie board and drinks, right? Like,
I know what that is now. So we serve charcuterie at our new members class. I had no idea what it was beforehand.
It's fancy. Yeah.
And that's what we serve our new members, because they're making a decision about joining. After you join the church, you're not getting fancy stuff. You're in. We're done with that. But I just you mentioned charcuterie, and it's been a running joke with the staff, and I completely interrupted you, and I don't apologize.
But this is important. This is important.
This is I want the world to know. Jackie mentioned charcuterie boards, and I actually know what that is. I feel so proud of myself. Anyway. Go ahead.
Well,
yes.
And the irony is how much it costs to put that board together. And I could really have a pretty decent steak instead of that, but here nor there. But I mean, it's different. It's different when a group of guys get together and how they bond, and very different than a way women get together and bond. So I do think you need both. Like, it's not a depends. I think you need to have intentional ways where there are things that we get to come together in, that we get to share in perspective and learning and equipping. But then there's also these moments to where we get to be shoulder to shoulder, face to face, and being able to really kind of make those connections as a family, as sisters together and as brothers together. So that's kind of my answer. I know that's like a non-answer to what you were answering, but yes, you're right. And we should have both.
I like the way we do things here. I was using a personal example just to get you talking, of course, is the question. And I'm very grateful for my church, because I do believe when a woman says, God has called me to do something, at West Bradenton, our perspective is, great, let's help you do that. Mm-hmm. And that's the way every church should be. Hey, God's called me to do something. Okay, let's equip you to do it. And when we do frame things in nuance too much, and when we frame things always about what you can't do, well, it really squelches the calling of God. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't really discover what we're called to do. And that could be for anyone. I mean, that could be, do not let anyone despise you for your youth. We could talk about not just gender, but we could talk about age. I mean, there's several ways that we could talk about this. But I love that, at least at my church, if God has truly called someone to do something, we're going to equip them to do it. And I think that should be every church's perspective. Last question, we'll end with this. Mm-hmm. Is there an ideal church for a woman? Can you name a name? And not West Bradenton. We've already made that. What does that look like? Should we even talk about ideals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to think on this for a while. And I think here's what I came up with. I think an ideal church for a woman is safe. It's where she is celebrated and where she's championed. So I know those aren't technically all C's. So I'm not a good Baptist, but safe, especially in our current culture, to where so much of the trust breakdown is happening within our institutions, within our churches. The abuse scandals. There's just so much that I think is cutting at the trust and safety of our churches. And so I think as I'm speaking with pastors and through Church Answers and just kind of consulting, the need for having a woman that is safe and trained and able to meet with women in your congregation as a safe place is absolutely vital right now in this time in history, in this time in the church. And if we're going to move forward and be able to heal and build trust back up again, we've got to have women that not only are going to be the listening ear, but then are trained in ways that they know how to give counseling, where they are trained in ways to where they're able to pick up indicators or things that have been said, to where if a woman has had an abortion, she knows how to point her to steps in healing. I mean, there's so much happening right now to where the likelihood of a woman sharing with a male pastor is not likely because of that trust breakdown. Domestic violence is another example to where she does not feel safe with women. And so churches and leadership being able to have a woman say, hey, we see you, we value you, we have these avenues, we have these resources that we are ready to give you because we love you and we want this to be a safe place. So I think that would be first and foremost safety would be ideal. The next, I think, would be celebrated. And so exactly like you're saying, even, with my book and you joking about it being with guys, like I know a pastor that is actually teaching through my book on Sunday mornings, and he's talking about the women and being a part of redemptive history. And so I think it seems so simple, but the way that a brother in leadership is able to celebrate and affirm gifts in his congregation is, oh my goodness, it's gold to us. And so I know I've experienced that with you and Tom, and like just the ability to say, hey, I see God working in your life and I want to equip you. Just like you said, I want to do everything I can for you to run hard after God. And so being able to celebrate the women that God is using and how he's using them in courageous ways. You want to look at foster care and ministry to the poor and compassion ministries. Like those are predominantly led by women. And so why are we not celebrating them a little bit more? And then championed, I think, is to really be able to say, you are not to be sitting on the sideline. Like you're not less than. You need to be in this deep theological discussion just as much as your brother or your husband or your son. Like I think maybe not having the cookies so much on the bottom shelf, and that we're raising women up because there's a deep longing there to want to know God and to want to know deep things. And so being able to say, you don't have to just show up and serve in the nursery, although we celebrate and we are grateful for that, but you can handle hard things. You can handle deep theological things. And so maybe raising the bar a bit to say, we see how God has created you, how he's gifted you. We want to push you further as you run and chase hard after God. So safe, celebrated, and championed.
That's a sermon right there. Thank you, Jackie. Again, talking with
I'm not going
Jackie
to comment
King.
on that.
I said that for a reason. Love it. Good stuff. Thank you for being on the show. Again, the book is The Calling of Eve. The link is in the show notes. Her podcast is called At the Table. So you want to go check out both of those things. And we also want to thank our sponsor, California Baptist University. I love CBU, love the campus, love the faculty, love the leadership. Let me tell you, this is a top-notch institution. And now eligible high schoolers can earn college credit online, and they are offering the first class free. All that you got to do is get the books and the course materials, first class free. And then they get a significant discount for every subsequent class. And what I mean by significant discount is it's usually $613 per credit, but they are giving it to you for $166 per credit. This is a great program for high schoolers. You need to go check this out. You can click on the link in the show notes, or you can go to calbaptist.edu/PCC. Again, calbaptist.edu/PCC. All right, listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Rainer on Leadership. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Give us a rate, a review, or a subscribe wherever you listen. We love that you tune in, and you really help us out with the algorithms when you give us a good review or a thumbs up or subscribe on YouTube. So all of you, we will see you next week on the next episode.
Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just two or three things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. Well. And maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.